Like you're looking super serious, Brie. Too serious. Too
We
serious.
are back,
It,
baby.
it can it cannot be that serious at this stage in the podcast.
I was just thinking I need to update that little graphic thing that we ran on the videos. It's a little bit we've got conference graphic people.
Nice.
Conference graphic. We got t-shirts.
Conference graphic.
So means we're looking at our 10-year update. You know, cutting edge update. It's happening. Yep. And here we are again. We're taking one step forward on the sojourn, and just that much closer to the age to come, which is, it's no joke. It's a serious matter, Andre. That's why I'm being serious.
So, are you going to show the graphic? Are you going to do this as like a teaser?
Yeah. No, we'll launch. We'll put a link to Eventbrite, maybe on this one. Maybe I'm not sure when it will drop. And then just click on the link, and then you just go to Eventbrite and you register. How about that? How you like them apples?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I like them apples, Mike.
All right. So that's one reason to celebrate. Another reason to celebrate is that this is our wrap-up session for Covenant Lord and Cultic Boundary. Right? Now, we haven't actually done it yet. Sorry, something still might go wrong. But at the same time, it's looking good. It's looking like we're actually going to wrap this up. And that would, I don't know, think about 12 or 13 episodes on this. And that is, I think that's our record. That's our best ever. And hopefully that will serve and help and be there on our website, and people can refer to it and read the book. And that's so nice and neat. Such a nice thing that we did here. I think
it's so good.
I think it's like by far our most educational endeavor thus far.
By far.
It's just
best content we've ever commented on, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can say that I've done a little bit of comment on this one.
If you do say so yourself.
Exactly.
That's right.
So what we are doing is we're moving on to just if anyone is tracking with the books, we covered like in a massive sweepstake chapter 6, which was the biblical theological examinations. Now, obviously can't cover everything in each one of these episodes, but
even most of the things.
Even most of the things. But I suppose
we just covered anything.
If I was reading the book, it would just be nice to have like some bounceable. What were your impressions? And okay, let's just spend an hour just talking about it. So that's the idea. You're reading along, you're wondering what the heck, and then you're going, okay. So that's intuitively, this is where we went, and maybe that's where you went as well. Maybe you went somewhere else. Maybe you had some other questions not addressed, but more than likely we'll deal with them as they come up in the future if they're important anyway. But what we want to do, just wrapping it up, is not, we're ending on chapter 7, not chapter 8. And the reason for that is chapter 8 is just kind of a wrap up of everything again. And it's got a lot of dissertation-ese kind of oriented things in there that I left because it sort of recommends future studies, and, it deals with the hypothesis and whatnot. And it, for anyone that cares for such things, it is kind of handy to have that, together with the opening of the book. For research purposes and just moving forward, I suppose, in academia and whatnot, if anyone wants to use the book for that reason. But, for our purposes, I think chapter 7 does well to kind of bring it to a close, because what we're doing in chapter 7 is really just kind of dealing with this matter. Okay, what about Meredith Klein's covenant theology now? And let's measure it against what everyone has said. And now we've done that already, so even that is a wrap up. But let's bring into mind the biblical theological examination. Let's see what the salient points were, and at least for us, as we've talked about it anyway, we don't have to stick to the book too solidly, because people can read it. But to kick us off, here's how it goes. Right, this chapter builds on the previous ones by bringing together the biblical theological examination of chapter 6, as well as the dialectic analysis of chapters 4 and 5, to assess the validity of Klein's thought. This is kind of the whole point. In that regard, the secondary research question in view is, how does Meredith Klein's covenant theology supply a valid substructure for the Reformed Two Kingdom project? And to answer that question, really what I've tried to do is just focus this thing on the 3 sections that deal with the ways in which they're valid. So Klein's theology in light of the biblical theological examination, and then the dialectic, and just rounding up with some key ideas as to why Klein's theology works and why it shouldn't be disregarded. So Before I kick off, any thoughts you guys had? I don't know if you can remember what you read when you read it, but
Yep, I remember what I read, but maybe if this is our closing session, I think just a final encouragement for people to get the book. It is available on Kindle. It is cheap. You can buy a hard copy if you want for more, but I think this is a book that is so necessary to read. There are so many voices in the area of covenant theology, and I think just these interlocutors you've chosen, theonomy, perspectivalism, and duovidianism, are, they're on within the Reformed camp. Those are the three main voices.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
if you really want to
varying-
handle on these things and Klein's unique contribution, this is the book to read.
Yeah, I think that's the key. Like, it might not be that quick fix, tell me what's going on with Doug Wilson book, but it will give you the tools that you need to handle the thing at this substructural level, in a way that doesn't fly off the rails. I think, you can kind of measure it back and forth. That's the big value, I think. It's for the people that want to just take it that notch deeper and go, okay, what is actually driving all of this? At least it won't answer every question, but it will just help with a dynamic that I'm not sure I can see very clearly in any other work at the moment. So it has some value in that regard.
I also just think these issues continue to be super relevant. Like they just continue to crop up in so many ways, shape, and form.
More than I would like. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Sure. I mean, but also I think the reality is if you are a Reformed Christian, listening to this, you are far more likely to be brought up within a kind of neo-Calvinist view of things, where you will be given one perspective on a lot of these things. And so this book will treat those views with respect, but will also give we'll give the kind of two kingdom point of view into that discussion. And so as these issues continue to be super relevant, and we continue to confront these kinds of decisions and these kinds of issues all the time, anyone in the Reformed world, I think, just needs to be aware of this, needs to read this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think the value of this chapter as well is it's basically looking at the question, who's reading the Bible right? Each one of these views is Reformed. Each one of these views takes the Bible seriously. Each one of these views tries to make a biblical case from the scriptures. Mm-hmm. They even try to take it from Genesis to Revelation. They even talk in terms of covenant and unity and discontinuity. So, each one's going to sound right if you're not aware of the landscape. But I think that this chapter really does just analyze those three conversation partners in the light of Klein's better biblical theology, just show the obvious faults.
Yeah, amen. I agree. So in terms of the biblical theological examination, just thinking about, let's say the theonomists, and then frame perspectivalism, and then the neo-Calvinists again. How would they sort of be impacted by the things we spoke about last session, for whenever we actually spoke about it? What was it, about 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago? But I suppose it will drop, just before this one. But I think the first thing to consider there is that the big thing we've shown, and that every theonomist would agree with, is that for a theonomist, the Mosaic covenant is rarely seen as this point of apex in terms of social and political application of the redemptive cultural mandate, right? And that mandate they see as continuous with Adam's task, no refraction necessary. Hold the refraction, ma'am. Just the whole enchilada.
Just pour it on that.
And that then is continuous with the Great Commission, which is the model, for the church par excellence. So that obviously, to say it that way, hopefully, you don't need to even say much more to say, well, that's going in a head-on collision with the kinds of things we were talking about in the biblical theological chapter, and that we're seeing a lot of that's playing on a concept of continuity that I don't think can account for all the details of the biblical story. It has to, it has to smooth over some of the things that you see, whether they be concrete exegetical details in the Noahic covenant, or whether they be, of the more systematic kind of oriented matters of what exactly grace is, and what merit is, and so forth. but then just, at large, where Israel fits in the biblical story, and how that must in some way be accounted for in light of the new covenant. There's just there has to, if not the Abrahamic covenant and its relationship, then certainly just the Mosaic and the new. I mean, there is just too much there to ignore and whitewash with continuity without any sense of discontinuity. So
for sure.
Yeah, I think that's.
And I think you note Banson's comment, which really just sort of outlines the way that he sees the relationship between church and Israel. And he says, basically that the church is the restoration of the commonwealth of Israel. That is a huge statement. You can't. You've got to have a lot of theology behind such a statement. The church is the restoration of Israel. So Israel and all that it was under the Mosaic economy, the church is a copy and paste of that.
Yeah,
strong continuity with that.
Because how is that different, Nick, from saying that the church is the typological fulfillment of Israel? So like what? Because exactly, I think it is a big claim, but at a first glance, someone might think that is very similar to what we might think. It's just normal covenantal theology, where you're talking about the church as the typological fulfillment of Israel. So how does the church as the restoration of?
I got a great quote for that from sorry, Nick, I know the question was posed to you, but H.M. Carson will answer this one, not D.A. Carson, H.M. Carson.
Herbert.
Okay, H.M.
Herbert.
Farewell from Anglicanism. Farewell to Anglicanism, guy.
Great book.
That dude.
Fantastic book. Wow, such a great book. But he says the king in Israel was not simply. Now this is like, I mean, it's amazing that he said this, right? This is like Klein, and this is again the detail not accounted for in this big schmooze. The king in Israel was not simply the leader of the nation, administering the laws and leading the armies. He was above all the representative of the kingly rule of Jehovah. The unique complexity, and this is me, and then going on to Dan Leoy, my supervisor. The unique complexity and integration of the Mosaic political laws and temple system is also well illustrated by Leoy, who highlights that in modern day parlance, the shrine complex in Israel would be like having the IRS, the Supreme Court, National Cathedral, Congress, and Citibank all rolled up into one multi-purpose institution, right? For this reason, not only should Israel's exercise of forceful dominion over Canaan not be replicated by the church today at any socio-political or cultural engagement level, but as Klein has correctly observed, it cannot. It just can't do it, right? And this is because when we work with the ordinary concept of church and state, that's just so like bland. You got church, state, maybe family is another thing, so that we're trying to construct a theocracy, which is really a three-dimensional object out of these two-dimensional elements that we have at our disposal, and that's why it's just never going to work. It's got to. I mean, that was an intrusion and a type and something that went beyond what we could even do, even if we wanted to. That, I mean, isn't that that ultimately for me is just the slam dunk right there, because
100%.
Is that true or not? You can't. Great idea. It fails. Why? Yeah. Because you just can't. Because it's not on the table at the end of the day.
It's like that everybody, as you point out in the book, everybody who claims Israel as a kind of like a model for how for what the kingdom of God should do now through the church. And we know that they qualify that, and we know that they qualify that, in various ways. So we're not using kind of military force and that kind of thing. It is through the preaching of the gospel and all that. But at some point, those qualifications begin to feel just like inconsistencies. Like they don't actually, like your starting model is being qualified so much that it just feels like actually was the wrong starting model to begin with. And I think that's what it feels like a little bit when you read those guys.
Exactly. I mean, the whole point of a model is that you don't have to do that. You want to try and find something that does account for the details, but doesn't require all these caveats.
Like a few fringe nuances, something like that. But this is like core stuff, like core differences that you have to constantly keep rolling out without a clear, like, biblical theological rationale for that, And I think it's just more look, obviously, and it doesn't work that way, and it just doesn't feel Yeah, it feels like you're running the running repairs on the model are so vast, and so central that actually you end up just driving a totally different car by the time that you are actually applying the model.
Totally. So, in conclusion, for the theonomy position,
nope.
Really, we're just saying a hermeneutic of complete continuity sounds good, right? But it can't cover the details. And we're seeing Klein's model as, if nothing else, if not arresting your heart to the beauty and glory of the plan of redemption, if they're not doing that, it's simply at a level of the model that it gives accounts for the data in the text, and provides a way to see continuity and discontinuity in a way that doesn't require over.
And maybe just commenting on one other element of their view. So there's the Israel church connection, but there's also the cultural mandate, Great Commission connection.
Yeah.
And so they basically see a flat line of continuity for the cultural mandate. And I think this is where Klein's response is so key, isn't it? You point out in your book that the pre-fall dominion mandate does not continue in us. It continues in Christ.
Oh.
And that's the key. It's a Christological thing.
Exactly.
It's not a church thing.
And it's it's a helpful point, because it's either that's true or not. Go look, see. If it's there, it's there. End of story. If it's not, stop messing around. One way or another. So I think that's massive. Good. All right. Perspectivalism.
But actually, just on that point, Mike.
Yeah.
Because I can hear the comments of the Dan Strangers, the voice that says, obviously it's fulfilled in Christ, but there's lots of things where Christ fulfills it, and then we become the Christians, we become the little Christs who carry that on, in the way that we live. So that would apply to,
as the Father has sent me, so I send you.
Yeah, that
incarnational. We would say it's true of Christ redemptive historically, in the same way that the cross, only Christ can die on the cross. Only Christ can fulfill the cultural mandate.
Exactly.
Only Christ can fulfill the dominion mandate.
And it is a better way to account for the kind of sojourner, pilgrim, and not this life, but life to come. My kingdom is not of this world. Emphasis that you have in the New Testament. So rather than have the Mosaic covenant, and then you put all that in as like the caveat, which fits so unnaturally with the Mosaic covenant and the Israel program and all that kind of thing. Now, rather, you see that this understanding that is fulfilled in Christ. Now, what do we do? Well, we continue to repopulate the new heavens and new earth, and we are waiting for that day, and we are, praying your kingdom come. That is what we're doing. So.
Because otherwise you have to caveat all of that with, but only now while we're being in a minority and persecuted.
That's right.
That's
but when we gain political control of India,
then the theology of glory, baby. Step aside theology of the cross. Yeah, exactly. This is not cool. So perspectivalism, right?
All right, I've got a comment.
Okay.
So the central, I think, hermeneutical insight that I thought you brought out well was it's all around who is the true bearer of the title Voss's successor. Is it Klein or is it Frame? Who's really reading the Bible in a true biblically theological way? And basically, I think what you demonstrate very well is that Frame and his lack of historical development, he reduces everything to a general equity principle. Thought that was, for me, that was the central insight that I thought really jumped out.
And it's not even that we're saying, like, because I want to be thinking, some might say, well, I'm not into Voss, so whatever, and that's fine. That you don't have to be into Voss to appreciate this point. What I'm trying to say is, like, if you are appreciative of Voss's capturing of something that is in the actual Bible's theology of the Bible, right? If you think that is true, then this point will have weight. The reason why it has weight for all the interlocutors is they all think it's true, right? So they're all have said as much, and now it's a matter of saying, okay, well, let's just see who sticks to this then, this hermeneutic. But even if not, even at just the almost an analytical level where you're looking at this thing going, all right, well, this then accounts for the differences. It's a methodological problem rather than someone's gone rogue problem, then it's just a matter of figuring out which methodology you think is most important or most biblical or persuasive or whatever. And in that regard, I think that you do have something to work with at the end of the day. So for example, I think like one of the reasons we've been so hard on the philosophy is because perspectivalism drives that methodology instead of Vossian biblical theology.
It's a philosophical imposition rather than taking it from the text.
Right, which, as you say, flattens everything out because it's, well, as Klein said, I mean, that was his whole argument when he said, listen, it's kind of got this controlling hermeneutic that stops anything from going anywhere. It just flattens everything out. It's like this filter, that can't get past the perspectival engine and method. And then when you think about that, and it just kind of it locks in the problem, then the next question becomes, okay, well, let me analyze perspectivalism. Is it what it's cracked up to be and so forth? And I think for me personally, and this is like everyone has to do their own work. I mean, here it is on the paper in the book, but for me, it's just like it falls under its own weight. It's one of those things where you just, as we've said, I mean, in order for a methodology to work, at least it has to be able to apply to itself its own principles, and I don't think you can do that with perspectivalism. People come away feeling like, hey, this is totally rigged. This is, you made it work for you, but why did it work that way? And there's no like real way to get at this thing. And you see a lot of people are frustrated with that. A lot of people are using it for their own ends. And that's a problem for me personally. The other problem is for anyone reformed. I mean, we have to remember that biblical theology is just like 100% in alignment. And Richard Barcellos is fantastic in his book, his doctoral dissertation on this, showing the alignment between Oren and really what was a pre-critical biblical theology at that point in the federalism and the method behind covenant theology and classical confessionalism. This is why this matters for reformed people, because it's not that we're so into Voss and we've got a little Voss fan club. It's because it's like it's in alignment. It's capturing back from a liberal post-critical era this hermeneutic that belongs to federalism. And and so it's not easy to say no to Voss and yes to federalism, And that's I think some of the problems that you're seeing in perspectivalism and such. They are really doing that. They're saying, yeah, we're still happy with the federalism thing, but look, we're rejecting the controlling hermeneutic leading up to that, and that's leaving us in this weird space, which is actually the problem.
Yeah, here's an example I think you raise, and it's just to demonstrate how they flatten everything instead of are sensitive to the twists and turns of the redemptive plot line. So basically, Abraham is merely Adam repeated and not fundamentally different. So here we got Adam in a covenant of works, who's given a cultural mandate. And whether it's Frame or even others like Christopher Wright in his Mission of God, and there's other transformationists that have a very similar sort of push. They just want to make Abraham like Adam. He's just if Abraham gets recommissioned as Adam was originally commissioned, and Noah was recommissioned as Adam is originally commissioned, then hey, here we are as the church. We get recommissioned just as they were all recommissioned. Yes, exactly. Yay! Exactly. We all know what the mission of God is.
Yes.
And that just flattens it into a bunch of
it's irritating because people buy into that going, oh, that's so simple. Yay. But it's like it just doesn't account for everything. And it's simple if you've also rejected Reformed theology. Let's put it that way.
But it's not, I think the Vossian thing is not just relevant for Reformed folk though, because to be honest, evangelical biblical theology owes itself to Voss as well. Because I mean, he really made it like, because it's like you say, biblical theology in some sense is a kind of liberal discipline. It was a way of rejecting scriptural unity and authority. And Voss turned that around. Actually, took the insights from that movement and actually showed it's perfectly consistent with an evangelical view of the canon. And I think that therefore any evangelical who values biblical theology is interested in Voss, even if they don't know it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I probably say that a little bit differently in the sense that I think that what they were calling it biblical theology, they were doing something totally different. And us within that milieu, and I don't know, within that context, and bringing the emphasis on Bible only and biblical authors, and just those textual issues to bear, reignited the way in which those things highlighted have highlighted a hermeneutic for covenant theology all along. One of the books that was so good on this, well, of course it would be, but Horton's his heavy academic, he's got
Salvation and Covenant, and
yes. Yeah. So in one of those books, he sort of puts forward an apologetic for a covenant historical and biblical theological method, effectively. And what was interesting to me is that Frame, in response to that, in his book Escondido Theology, says that theology, he actually, front and center denies that theology ought to be controlled by that Vossian hermeneutic, that redemptive historical hermeneutic. He says he's reluctant to allow for any hermeneutical priority to be given to redemptive history rather than to timeless truths in Revelation. So the priority falls on the timelessness, these principles, and instead, and he wants to have a more flexible, in his own words, approach that does greater justice to the centrality of Christ than to the narrowly redemptive historical approach. Now, you think about what he's saying there. That is really serious stuff, and very, very out of, this is what has sparked Kohlberg off, in his rampage against the whole thing, just to kind of say, listen, this is just, say what you want about it, but that is not at all coming out of anything reformed historically. So, you just have to deal with that one way or another. And so again, we've said everything that needs to be said there in terms of, the method itself, but that's a good point to leave people with, just think about that. Because I know a lot of people have also used and have appreciated perspectivalism. I think, again, as a philosophical method for ethics and philosophy, it has a lot to commend itself, but yeah, for biblical theology, not so much. All right.
Interesting.
An examination of the Duovidian critique, or the Neo-Calvinist critique, more specifically, I suppose, in light of what the
Neo-Duovidians.
Yeah, well, even that sort of term is potentially loaded. So let's just go Neo-Calvinist, broadly Neo-Calvinist critique. The Duovid champions in some form or another, not necessarily faithful champions, but still, there they are, holding his flag and carrying his card and so forth. I think one of the big things we uncovered here that I would like to leave people with, again, is just the whole the sense of closeness to the Kuyperian / Duovidian worldview, project, and task. I think there's a lot there that I think is fine and is helpful and so forth. It really just comes down to this matter of eschatology, that's what it is at the bottom line. I love what Waters says. Christ has not only undone what Adam did, but he has done what Adam failed to do. Right now, again, simple statement, but so powerful in light of the debate. Because is it true that we're doing that now? Are we doing what Adam failed to do, or has Christ done it? Because that just makes a big difference right there, and that is eschatology. And as Klein said, again, I think this is great, where he's sort of responding to, did I say Klein or Irons?
You said Klein.
Oh, sorry,
Klein.
Irons. I mean Irons. Irons in talking about Klein. It was that on their paper on Klein's Theology of the Cultural Mandate or something, where he did it at the Bonson Conference. Great paper and presentation. But what he says is, Niebuhr's got these positions that we spoke about right in the beginning, Christ and culture and so forth.
Culture.
And he says that Klein he doesn't fit into the Lutheran rubric, the paradox rubric, but rather is he is the transformer, or Klein's response to Niebuhr's paradigm sees Christ not as the transformer, as in a Calvinistic, what did we call it, transformationalist perspective, but rather the creator of eschatological culture. So he's not the
absolute genius.
Yeah,
absolute
it really is.
Genius.
It really is.
Outside the box.
Totally.
New category.
And it's perfect, because that's exactly what we're saying.
Exactly.
That the whole issue has to do with whether this can be made holy, whether the common can be made holy or not. And we're saying it's legitimate, but not sanctified, right? The sanctified culture is the new creation that Christ creates through his completion of the new of the Adamic task, and what he is now doing from heaven in his building of the eschatological temple in the Two Age, paradigm that we now stand. So this is it's just like, it's so crazy because with that in mind, if you get that straight, it's almost like it takes, if neo-Calvinists, no matter what they say they believe in, believes that, and a Kleinian believes that, they're holding hands, and they can hang out, and they can actually do, they can have different stances, and like one has a passive, one has an active stance for culture, and one
optimistic, pessimistic.
Yeah, exactly. None of that really matters ultimately. What matters is that we're saying that your advances in the kingdom mean a certain thing here, and the kingdom ultimately is the new creation. That we can never bring it in by our own kingdom business and so forth. So it becomes an issue of semantics once you get that theology right. I mean, ultimately we'd still argue for helpful words to present the right thing, but I think that baseline undercurrent is just really something that hardly ever gets mentioned, and is like all important in the debate, I think.
100%.
Yeah.
Could I think there's a couple of phrases that are probably worth exploring because in Reformed circles, these phrases are sort of thrown around. So there's sort of the atmosphere of the Christ and culture debate, and we're all trying to situate ourselves on the spectrum, and Leons has just given us a new category and blown it out of the water. But there's a couple of phrases that get thrown around, and it's probably worth interacting with these. So let me put it to you, Mike, and I don't know how your pagination works, but mine's from page 314. Okay. You use these two phrases in contrast to one another, sort of representing the Kleinian versus the Neo-Calvinist view as a grace perfects nature a grace restores nature paradigm.
Right.
So let me throw those phrases. What do you mean? What do we want to mean by those phrases, and why are they important the way that they're said?
Yeah, well, and there, it's right there alongside what Leon said about creating the creator of eschatological culture. This is Van Drunen, his big insight, I think, where he's like, none of those work, those two slogans, because they don't have enough categories. They don't, you can't just, they all are sort of true, and we can all agree with all of them to some extent or another, the Roman Catholic sort of thing, or the Neo-Calvinist thing. But what we're saying is that Christ is the sustainer of a common grace culture, right?
Yeah.
Or how did you word it? Sorry, I'm not there on the right page.
So there's a grace perfects nature, or grace restores nature.
Right. So grace sustains a common grace,
nature. Yeah. So common grace preserves nature, and saving grace consummates nature. That's your next sort of alternative phrases.
Saving grace, and that's straight out of Van Drunen. I hope I footnoted him somewhere. He should be footnoted.
So let me say it again. Common grace preserves nature.
Yes.
So that's the important distinction. It's the injection of common grace, preserving nature as a preservation being a key thing there, and nature being good.
Yes.
And then saving grace, consummating nature, and there's that eschatological notion being put in.
Yeah, at least two propositions are necessary: common grace, and this is a quote from Van Drunen, and I did footnote him. Common grace preserves nature, and saving grace consummates nature. I think that is a stroke of genius as well, because those two other definitions and slogans, by definition, don't have common grace in their system, which makes all the difference. And they're operating on this potentially disastrous ground motive thing where you're sort of not moving to the consummation. It's creation for redemption, and that's the end of it. But we're talking about this is ultimately heading towards that consummation. That's where saving grace kicks in. That's where the kingdom is finally perfected. That's what that sets at juxtaposition what's going on, even at the best, of the preservation of common grace, with everything we're seeing now in our cultural task. So
100%.
Yeah, it's really just
because if you say grace does something to nature, so firstly define what sort of grace. Are we talking common grace?
Yeah.
Well, we know that's only preservative.
Right.
Or are we talking saving grace? Well, that's what Christ will do at his second coming, and that's eschatological.
Yeah.
And so you got two kingdoms by virtue of these two different realms, these two types of graces that are at work under the one lordship of Christ.
Hey, if you don't like that concept of two kingdoms, call it something else, but get it the same thing. Get
two
it
ages.
The same. Yeah, get it the same. Well, yeah, I don't know if that works, but get it the same thing ultimately. I try and find another way to say that, because that is needed. It's necessary. It's a part of what the Bible's saying.
Because it's another one of those things where, in the same way that the Mosaic covenant as this kind of example of the church and what the church is trying to do to expand the kingdom, the Noahic covenant, this is another one of those things. By just trying to force it into this kind of like one culture thing, you end up having to nuance it so much, or turn it into something that it's just not intending to do. So rather let those two covenants just say what they're saying. Don't try and wedge them. Don't try and flatten them into the system. Because in some sense, those are the two sticking points here. They've always been uncomfortable in certain expressions of the Reformed covenant theology, I think.
Yeah, amen. And I think that so what we've done is basically moved along more or less the first part of the chapter 7. But the thing is, we have said a lot of what has been said in the the rest is kind of a recap. So we've talked about things like hey, Kleinianism isn't Lutheranism. We know this because Lutherans say that, and we know this because ultimately so there's a little spiel on what Lutheranism actually is in terms of their two kingdom doctrine. There's a little spiel on some critiques on Klein and how does it work that he calls for baptism and paedobaptism in this way, and how is he not opening up the Constantinian system and so forth, and so just some things of interest, I think. And what the chapter tries to argue, without going into too much detail now, is just that those some of those points might have things to say by way of a periphery, but they certainly don't get at the nuclear reactor of the system. And so maybe they might affect whether you're Baptist or Presbyterian, or what kind of Presbyterian, or what kind of view you have there, or whether you adopt his understanding of the sacraments, but again, that's all just like extra to this thing that we're talking about, which has to do with really this main jugular of Genesis to Revelation in biblical theology. So I think for anyone that's interested, have a read through those last little bits. But maybe I could summarize this way. The book concludes effectively, and hopefully people can kind of gel with this from all that we've said thus far, that Klein's theology is worth taking seriously, and it does stand as something valid and a contender on 3 main points. Number 1, methodological validity. Much of what we've been talking about tonight. It's got a solid biblical theological sort of backing. It's VOS 2.0. It is, that whatever you would say for that, you would say for Klein, he is a faithful representation of that method of doing theology, which, I am convinced is the Bible's method of, the Bible. It sort of, it unfolds itself. And that's why it's not a small point. But secondly, not only this biblical methodological validity, but there is a historical validity to it. Now, I realize this is not going to matter as much to those who are not in-house Reformed, but this is a big part of the debate that was uncovered, that people are just slinging mud and going, well, you're not really Reformed, and it becomes a Reformed identity debate. And what we said there is that no, that there's a lot of alarmist tactic there, and there is at best you're showing that Klein is a kind of minority position, but as I think Venema said, that you just would have to be completely ignorant of what Reformed theology has really done and said to think that he has no place in the Reformed world in terms of the discussion on covenant theology. Is just not true. When you look at the discussion, it's just there's too much diversity and variety. And coming at it from a Reformed Baptist angle, I mean, certainly I would include us in that discussion, which means he's right there in the middle. We
are Reformed.
Yeah, exactly.
We are.
And then we have a nice, we do have a cavalier about it all, though, don't we? We're just like, okay, well, even if we're not, who cares anyway? And but at the same time, it's kind of it's a point that I've concluded that anyone that says he's just not Reformed, he's Lutheran or something, that's just not valid. And so there is a validity in Klein's presentation from a reform perspective if you want someone on the reform team. All right. Thirdly, there's a functional validity. And this is the final kind of wrap up. And this is really what we've been talking about from beginning to end. And that's just where we can't help ourselves. We're just jumping to end points all the time as pastors, seeing the relevance, seeing the, what's going to go wrong if you don't have this in place. And we just can't help, we see it all the time. 100%. We preach it all the time. So from a pastoral perspective, I mean, this is an important element of validity, because you can't just say, oh yeah, well, he gives grounds to the two king thing, and that's kind of, whatever, if it has no relevance to current discussions. But I think what we're saying is just it has every relevance imaginable. So there is a practical and functional validity there that commends his work. So Klein presents a covenant theology that not only challenges monocovenantal conceptions of Reformed thought, but in so doing shows a clear connection between soteriology, missiology, and cultural engagement. Added to this, it was seen that Klein's protological eschatology, along with his insistence upon a basic level of structural duality, prevents the conception of the cultural task that falls prey to triumphalism and over-realized eschatology. Ta-da! So tell us. A voluminous body of theological material has been produced as a result.
So, Mike, what do you want people to take away from your book? I mean, just in layman's speech.
Two things. Number one, what we were saying earlier, I want them to just be aware that when you get onto the blogosphere and talk about two kingdoms, you're dealing with trashy mudslinging for the most part of it. So, and look, I'm not saying that all of the points that people are making at the periphery or semantic level are not important or not relevant, but they just grab this guy and this guy and start slinging mud without understanding the substructural level of the discussion is just, it's at best it's a failure, but at worst it's going to actually lead you to do things that are harmful to unity and really misrepresent the church and potentially, I think even I've seen this, it imperils your soul sometimes if you get so caught up. All it takes is something to irritate you by way of a cultural assault, and then you don't have the robust categories to deal with that and remain a Christian and remain someone who perseveres and remain loving and remain
remain not a Christian nationalist.
Right. The next thing you know, you're pulling up your flamethrower, and that is a disaster in terms of the Christian witness and in terms of the Christian mission. So this is not, at best you fail to understand, but at worst you really do damage to yourself, to the church's mission. It's going, and then I would say it's relevant because it's going to affect you. Like, you can't get away from this. Someone asked me, I can't remember. Someone asked me to do a quick little elevator speech. Why should they read the book? And what I said, and what my instinct is like, okay, good. You think covenant theology, that's helpful, and you think now you're getting irritated at what's happening in culture. Have you put those dots together? Can you understand why you're acting a certain way and why this one's reacting a certain way? Don't make a move until you do. You might still disagree with everything I'm saying, but just understand it first and then do it, because that alone will make the world a better place, I think. And then, finally, as we just kind of go in the opposite direction, I'm hoping that people that should be friends that are bickering over nothing become friends, as a result of just going, actually, that's a good point. We actually are so close on this, and I can totally fold on this one. And this is not as important. And then, there could be a greater unity in that regard. So we don't have to fight everyone that's not Kleinian and, two kingdom. And I think that would be right in sync with what Van Drunen's saying. He doesn't want to fight anyone that, is not doing something really, really wrong. And he's all too keen to see, his position in light of a nuanced, spectrum of views in Reformed theology. So, I think that works in what we're seeing in the tenor of the best two kingdom literature coming out in Van Drunen and the like. But, even if you're not a massive Van Drunen fan, just something that kind of, potentially from the other side, even, just moves the Kleinians toward, reading some neo-Calvinistic literature that perhaps they wouldn't have, or being more open to learn from those who have been, just influential to Klein himself, and and so forth, which perhaps they hadn't even thought to conclude, which was a helpful point for me. Like I came away going, geez, Kuyper is the good guy, and sure, he said some things that I'm not in agreement with, but structurally he's there. He just had to work out his old system. So anyway, stuff like that. It's not exactly layman, it's not exactly elevated speech, but it will suffice.
Yeah. And maybe I could just plug it for the pastors. I mean, being a new Calvinist, now I didn't become I'm not a typical new Calvinist. I didn't become a new Calvinist through the internet. I discovered Calvinism through books, pre the internet. I'm old enough to have read some Banner of Truth books before I found John Piper and others on the internet. Okay, But one of the things that I discovered, because I thought, you become Reformed and there's a Reformed consensus. And so you've sort of got, and everyone's going to say the same thing. So if you read John Murray, you can read John Frame, you could just get anything from the OPC or Westminster, and it's all just going to be one voice. And you realize that it's quite varied. And the deeper you go, the more varied that it gets.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for a guide that is biblically faithful, I've found that, Klein's sensitivity to the highs and the lows of redemptive history, as he looks at the distinctiveness of the covenant of redemption, the distinctiveness of the covenant of works, the distinctiveness of the Noahic covenant, the distinctiveness of the Noahic covenant, Abrahamic covenant, the distinctiveness of the Mosaic covenant, and it's each of their unique contributions. He's the best guide. And for me, he's just settled so many, you come up with conversations and questions, and you realize there are debates all over the place. And Klein just time after time,
so helpful.
With
and even if you
deep,
end up
rich theology and excellent exegetical work, just comes up with wonderful answers that settles so many debates.
Creative
so if you're in that place of exploring Reformed theology and you're discovering the diversity of all of the views, this is a great way to get yourself deep into the world of covenant theology and get some great answers.
Yeah, which is the world of biblical theology, which is the text.
Amen.
Which is beautiful. And that's what we want. That's what we're enamored with. All right, final thoughts, Andre?
Yeah, no, it's same as Nick. I just think that structure, that way of making sense of the continuity and discontinuity was like a real lifeline from Klein, because I was there sitting in a Reformed world where I was never totally satisfied with the answers I was getting from like certain versions of covenant theology, where the Mosaic covenant was just the same as the Christian life, and I couldn't quite square that with what I was seeing in Scripture. Galatians, but also in the Old Testament itself, and so that kind of nuance really helped me. But also I was at the time when the kind of what was it called, New Covenant theology was really on the rise, and so I had that on the other hand, and that was making some of the points that I really felt were good critiques of the standard Reformed covenant theology, but also didn't quite satisfy in some ways. And I was amazed talking to Mike about this, because I was already starting to go in a kind of what we used to call the Yu Mu direction, because of Doug Moo and Michael Yu and all that. And so I was already starting to go that way. But then when Mike introduced me to Klein, it was like, yes, this is it. This is the thing that makes sense of that. But it's not only that, it's also just about making sense of, and we've spoken about this, but that kind of eschatological focus, I think that's so important for the Christian life. It's so important for pastoral ministry. It's so important for not losing your head in politics. I'm convinced that the kind of focus on the political arena that arises out of certain neo-Calvinist personas and movements is a kind of worldliness that is actually deeply unhelpful, and has caused the church to kind of factionize, around politics and around political issues. And I just think that this is a travesty, because we are a people of a kingdom that is not of this world, and we should always have this kind of measured take. So even when politics seems to be going nuts, they are never talking about issues of ultimate concern for us. It's always tempered by this, that these are not ultimate. The eschatological reality is ultimate.
Yeah.
And so it just chills everything out a little bit. And I just think that
we're not
reason
failing
alone
in
we need it.
our cultural mandate.
No, absolutely not.
When the wicked prosper.
Yeah.
Amen.
I go back to the old hymn, turn your eyes upon Jesus. That's sort of,
yeah.
But there you go.
Yeah, that I mean, that is just like.
And I will also say, Mike, because I know you won't say it, and Nick has said it, but it is a fantastically clear and concise book. It is concise the way that Calvin could only ever dreamed it. He wanted it, but he never achieved it.
Yeah.
No, it is. I mean, I'm reading this as someone who's researching a PhD at the moment, and I'm thinking, I don't know if it's even within me to reduce complex things down to the level of clarity. So it is a book worth reading for the benefits we've mentioned, but it also is just a very good book. So please do.
It's not an easy book, but it is an essential book.
It's easy.
What freaked me out was when I quoted Leo earlier, and he said to me, like halfway through the process, he's like, "What you're being evaluated on, Michael, is your ability to condense and so what did he say? To manage the tonnage of information, and whether or not you can do this will depend on whether you're able to move forward, and it's just something to that effect that just sobered me right up, and maybe that's what
this is the test.
Yeah, it is.
If you don't finish, you do fail.
Yeah, and it's just it's like you're gonna either be crushed or come out alive. So anyways, we can all pray for Andrew now as he sets off sail on this, and we can start talking about demons now, which is pretty cool. But now that we're wrapped up on this book,
well, let's talk about this conference that's coming up, because segueing from this book, we this conference, I think, really is we're trying to summarize the key issue.
All right.
Come on now, Mike. Come on, got a promo. You got a promo, Mike.
Share screen. Here we go. Share screen.
Go on YouTube, everyone. Have a look.
There we go.
Wow.
Okay, that is our
Which fantastic artist did this remarkable piece of work?
This is the artist himself. We're using some image that's some unknown artist. S is I don't know. I had a little something to do with that. But it's also a font artist. And then my wife put this all together in a beautiful, this will be the t-shirt, the conference t-shirt. Mandate and mission, if you're not watching the video.
Beautiful. Mandate and mission. That's what it's all about. Good.
And then, Sojourner Sessions. I like that too, Mike.
Yeah, because we're not wanting to do a conference. It's not like a conference, bright lights, big city.
Woo, it's like unplugged,
It's unplugged. It's what we do. It's what we do best. We don't plug anything in. We don't even know how, unless someone does it for us. So, but we'll talk. That's what we do. We'll talk. We'll each put a session together, and it'll happen in beautiful Wellington there in the background.
Beautiful.
With these three good-looking guys on this cover. I mean,
gorgeous, bald, bearded. Well, some of us are bald.
I know. So some of us need a little work there. Some of us need a little, bob around. Yep. Anyway.
Yeah, some of us are hanging on for dear life.
Okay. Well, with that in mind,